You are looking at a photograph taken over 150 years ago, the mugshot of George Atkins. He was not a murderer or a bank robber. His crime? Embezzling 5 shillings and 3 pence. A tiny sum of money, yet it cost him 1 month in prison with hard labor. George's story is a perfect snapshot of the cruelty and injustice of the Victorian English justice system, where poverty itself was often treated as a crime. George was born in 1842 in Churchie, the son of an agricultural laborer. His life was predetermined by his social class. The 1851 census records show George at age 9, living with his 66-year-old widowed grandmother, Sarah Sigary. She still had to work in the fields to support him. This is a typical image of the struggle for survival. There was no social safety net. One sick day could mean starvation. By age 19, George and his brother were still working alongside their father, their lives tied to the fields marked by hard work and meager, uncertain pay, with virtually no escape. George found what seemed like a better job, a drayman for a local brewery after 1871. This job brought hope, a small step up from farm labor, as it involved money and public interaction. It was here that George breached trust. He embezzled 5 shillings and 3 pence from a Mrs. Harriet Warrington and issued a personal receipt to cover the theft. This was not an isolated incident. George had been discharged previously for a 9 shilling deficit, a clear sign of constant financial pressure. For a poor laborer, the difference between keeping 5 shillings and going hungry could be razor thin. The company swiftly acted. The charge: breach of trust, embezzlement. On May 14, 1873, George Atkins stood in the Churchie courtroom. Faced with the irrefutable evidence, the receipt he himself had signed, George pleaded guilty. The sentence? 1 month's imprisonment with hard labor. We need to understand, why was the legal system so unforgiving over such a small sum? To understand the sentence, we must look at the core of Victorian law. The system was not designed for the poor. First, the idolization of property rights. The law at the time protected the assets of the masters, the brewery, at all costs. Theft, no matter how small, was viewed as a direct attack on the capitalist social order. Second, hard labor. This was more than just imprisonment. Punishments like the treadmill or stone breaking were pointless, physically debilitating tasks designed to cleanse and punish the spirit. The goal was not rehabilitation, but rather to send a powerful message of social retribution. Anyone employed by the masters who violated trust must endure extreme suffering. George was used by the system to set an example. How much was 5 shillings worth in 1873? For George, who might earn about 10 to 12 shillings a week as a farm worker, 5 shillings represented half a week's income. We must contextualize it. The cost of bread, heating coal, and rent. It wasn't luxury money, it was survival money. The difference between keeping that sum and facing the prospect of not being able to heat his family's home on a cold night could have been the motive that drove George to his crime. His act was desperate, but the law classified it as a serious felony. Upon his release in June 1873, George Atkins carried the permanent stain of a criminal record. For the small community of Churchie, this was a lifetime sentence. However, here is the bright spot of the story. George was determined to return to his community. The prison register noted his intended residence, Hardwick's Lane. He returned to that exact spot. 4 years later, he reappeared in the records, marrying Eliza Sewell. George returned to the life he knew best: labor. He proved that the system's punishment could not completely destroy his spirit. George and Eliza raised 5 children, and George continued working the fields, even at the age of 69, until near the end of his life. He died in 1919 at the age of 77. George paid for 5 shillings with a month of hard labor, but he reclaimed his dignity through a lifetime of unrelenting toil, spanning another 45 years. George Atkins's story is evidence of historical injustice, but also a monument to the unbreakable spirit of the ordinary working man. If you're interested in more stories of the harsh realities of Victorian life, please subscribe and let me know. Do you think George's sentence was fair, or was it a form of class oppression?